The Billionaire's Betrayal: How a Pregnant Wife Vanished to Bring Down an Empire. Attention, lovers of justice and high-stakes drama. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, please smash that subscribe button, hit the like on this video, and drop a comment with your immediate thoughts. Your support helps us keep sharing powerful narratives just like this one. What if I told you the last time a tech mogul saw his pregnant wife? She was smiling from the doorway of their penthouse, only to return 9 months later to utterly dismantle his entire empire. This is the true story of Ilara Vance, a woman who uncovered a shocking betrayal by her husband, a Silicon Valley tech guru, and made a decision that changed everything. She didn't just leave. She vanished so completely that even elite private investigators couldn't track her. But when she returned, she was not the helpless victim her husband expected. She was something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. What happened during those 9 months will leave you speechless, and her final act of revenge? It's so brilliant, so perfectly executed. It became a masterclass in corporate and personal justice. Ilara's journey proves that sometimes the greatest strength comes from our darkest moments. If this incredible journey of courage and justice moves you, show it by hitting that like button. It really helps more people discover these powerful stories. Chapter 1: The Marble Prison. Ilara Vance was standing in the marble lobby of her $30 million San Francisco prison, one hand resting protectively on her 8-month pregnant belly. The other was clutching a bank statement that chilled her to the bone. The Pacific Heights mansion stretched around her like a museum of her former life, with glass walls and designer furniture that she once believed represented success. "Julian!" Her voice echoed through the cavernous space. There was no answer. Her husband, Julian Holt, was likely in his home office, preparing for tomorrow's IPO announcement that would make them even wealthier. Ilara had given up her career as an investigative journalist 3 years ago, when Julian had swept her off her feet with his tech mogul charm and promises of a perfect life. She'd traded her press badge for a wedding ring, her news desk for charity galas. But old habits die hard, and the journalist inside her couldn't ignore the alarm bells scattered across his financial records. The credit card charges started small: coffee shops in downtown San Jose, where Julian claimed he never went. Restaurant tabs for 2, when he said he was at solo meetings. A recurring monthly payment to something called Metro Suites, which Julian had vaguely justified as a business expense. But tonight, the charges had escalated: high-end jewelry, boutique lingerie, and a weekend getaway to the beaches of Big Sur, which had never appeared on Julian's calendar. "There you are, beautiful." Julian's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his $1,000 suit from whatever late-night meeting had kept him out. Even exhausted, he was devastatingly attractive, with that confident, practiced smile that once made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. "We need to talk," Ilara said, lifting the statement. Julian's smile faltered for a moment before snapping back into place. "Can it wait until tomorrow? The IPO announcement is at 8 a.m. and I need to review my notes. No, it cannot wait." Ilara stepped closer, her journalistic instinct screaming that she was about to uncover something massive. "What is Metro Suites, Julian?" "Metro Suites? I told you it's a business expense. We rent space there for client meetings. $7,000 a month for client meetings." Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ilara, you're pregnant and stressed. The doctor said you need to avoid unnecessary anxiety." There it was, the deflection he'd been using for months. Every time she questioned something, he blamed her hormones or her pregnancy. But Ilara had covered stories about manipulation and gaslighting. She knew the signs. "I want to see this meeting space," she said quietly. "That's not possible. Client confidentiality." Ilara studied her husband's face, looking for the tells she'd learned to spot from years of interviewing politicians and CEOs. The slight tension around his eyes, the way his left hand moved to adjust his wedding ring. Classic tells of deception. Then I'll find it myself. Julian's mask slipped completely. Ilara, you are being paranoid. This isn't healthy for you or the baby. But Ilara was already walking away. Her mind was racing with the same concentrated determination that once made her one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. She had busted corruption in the San Jose City Council, exposed massive fraud in tech startups, and dismantled a human trafficking ring. Whatever Julian was hiding, she would find it. She just had no idea the truth would destroy everything she thought she knew about her life. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Ilara felt the baby kick hard against her ribs. She would soon be responsible for protecting another life. And if her husband was lying about something as simple as an office space, what else was he hiding? The journalist inside was fully awake now, and she wouldn't rest until she had answers. Chapter 2. The Truth Unmasked. Ilara spent the night awake, researching Metro Suites. By dawn, she had discovered it was a luxury apartment complex in downtown San Jose, not an office building. The kind of place tech executives kept discreet second residences for affairs, or entertaining clients they wanted to keep off the books. Julian left early for his IPO announcement, kissing her forehead and reminding her to rest. The moment his sports car roared out of the driveway, Ilara was in her car, following the address she'd found online. The 45-minute drive gave her time to think. Every marriage has secrets, she reasoned. Maybe Julian truly was using the apartment for business. Maybe she was being paranoid, as he claimed. But as she pulled into the parking garage of the sleek, high-rise building, her gut told her otherwise. "I'm here to see the apartment rented under Holt Industries," she told the concierge, using her most authoritative voice. The young man behind the desk hesitated. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Holt left specific instructions that only he and Ms. Navarro are authorized to visit." Ilara's heart seized up. "Ms. Navarro?" The concierge's face went pale. Sylvia Navarro." Ilara pressed, recognizing the name of Julian's business partner, the woman who had joined his firm 6 months ago as the head of strategic development. Before the concierge could respond, Ilara was already walking towards the bank of elevators, her mind reeling. Sylvia Navarro was 26. She was brilliant and beautiful in a way that made other women feel invisible. Julian had introduced her as his new business partner, someone who would help take the company to the next level. Ilara had even briefly liked her during their quick encounter at a company event. The ride in the elevator to the 15th floor felt eternal. Ilara's hands were shaking as she approached apartment 15-2, using a spare key she'd found in Julian's desk drawer, labeled JS Office. She'd thought it meant Julian Holt Office. The apartment was exquisite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Jose Bay. Expensive furniture filled the open-plan space, and everywhere Ilara looked, she saw evidence of a life she wasn't a part of. Women's clothes in the closet, Sylvia's prescription bottles in the bathroom, photos of Julian and Sylvia vacationing in places Ilara had never seen. But the final blow came when she opened Julian's laptop, which was still logged into his email account. The password was Sylvia's birthday. Ilara scrolled through months of correspondence. Every message was a stab to her heart. Julian and Sylvia weren't just having an affair. They were planning a complete takeover of Ilara's life. The trust fund documentation must be finalized before the baby is born, Julian had written to Sylvia 3 weeks ago. "Once Ilara gives birth, we can implement phase 2. Are you sure the psychiatric evaluation will hold up in court?" Sylvia had replied. "We need her declared mentally incompetent before she can contest anything." Ilara's hands trembled as she read on. They had been planning this for months. Julian had married her not for love, but for access to the $50 million trust fund she had inherited from her grandmother. A trust fund that would transfer to their child if she died or was declared mentally incompetent. A key turning in the lock froze Ilara's blood. She quickly shut the laptop and frantically searched for a place to hide. Voices were approaching from the hallway. "The IPO announcement went perfectly," Julian was saying. "We'll be worth double what we are now by tomorrow." "And Ilara?" Sylvia's voice was closer now. "She still has no idea. The pregnancy has made her so emotional and suspicious. It will be easy to convince everyone she's having a breakdown." Ilara pressed herself against the wall behind the kitchen island, barely breathing as Julian and Sylvia entered the apartment. "I still think we're moving too fast," Sylvia said. "We can't wait much longer. Once the baby is born, the trust fund transfers. If we don't have her declared incompetent before then." I know. Judge Harrison is already prepared to sign the commitment papers. Your friend, Dr. Chen, will provide the psychiatric evaluation." Ilara watched in horror as Julian embraced Sylvia. "Soon, this will all be ours," he murmured, kissing her neck. Ilara will be safely in a private facility, and we'll have everything." "The money, the company, and the baby?" Sylvia asked. "What about the baby?" "Children belong with their father, especially when their mother is mentally ill." Ilara had heard enough. She crept toward her pregnant belly bumped an end table, sending a vase crashing to the floor. Julian and Sylvia broke apart. "What was that?" Sylvia whispered. Ilara ran. Call to action and interaction. Middle. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, please let us know by commenting below. Interaction question. Imagine you are Ilara, having just heard your husband and his mistress plan to institutionalize you and steal your baby. What is the very first thing you would do? Call the police? Run? Gather evidence? Tell us your survival plan in the comments. And if you're new here and love stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We share incredible real stories like this every week. Chapter 3. The Chase. Ilara's hands were shaking so violently she could barely start her car. She drove aimlessly through the tree-lined streets of San Jose, her mind reeling from what she had discovered. Julian didn't love her. He never had. Their entire marriage was an elaborate scam designed to steal her inheritance and take her child. She needed help. She needed proof. She needed someone to believe her. Her first call was to Detective Mark Olson, her former source from her journalism days. Mark had been a lifeline for several of her investigations, and she trusted him more than anyone in law enforcement. "Ilara, my God, how long has it been?" 3 years, how are you? "Mark, I need your help. I think my husband is planning to have me institutionalized so he can steal my trust fund." A long pause. "Ilara, that's a serious accusation. Are you okay? You sound agitated." Even Mark thought she sounded crazy. Ilara forced herself to speak more calmly. "I have proof. Financial records, emails, recordings. Can you meet me somewhere private?" They agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Sacramento, far from anywhere Julian might look for her. Ilara spent the drive trying to organize her thoughts, to present the information in a way that would convince Mark she wasn't having a pregnancy-induced breakdown. But when she arrived at the coffee shop, Mark wasn't alone. He was sitting with Dr. Chen, the psychiatrist Julian had mentioned in his conversation with Sylvia. Ilara's blood ran cold. Mark had betrayed her. The trap was already closing. "Ilara," Dr. Chen said softly as she approached their table. "Julian is very worried about you. He says you've been having paranoid thoughts, imagining conspiracies." "Mark," Ilara looked at her former colleague, pleading with her eyes. "You know me. You know I don't make things up." Mark's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Ilara, you've been under a lot of stress. Pregnancy can trigger psychological episodes. Dr. Chen only wants to help." It dawned on Ilara with chilling clarity that Julian's reach extended further than she had imagined. How many people were on his side? How long had he been planning this? She turned and walked quickly toward the exit, but Dr. Chen followed her. Ilara, please don't make this any harder than it has to be. Julian has already initiated the involuntary commitment process. You can come willingly, or the police can escort you. Either way, you'll get the help you need. Ilara broke into a run. Her pregnant belly made her clumsy and slow. Behind her, she heard Dr. Chen on her phone, likely calling Julian. Or the authorities. She reached her car and locked the doors, her heart pounding. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Julian. Sweetheart, Mark called me. He's worried about you. Come home so we can talk. I love you. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. If Ilara hadn't overheard Julian's real conversation with Sylvia, she might have believed his concerned husband act. She drove to the nearest bank and withdrew $10,000 in cash from her personal account. If Julian was monitoring her credit cards and bank accounts, she needed to go off-grid immediately. Her phone rang constantly as she drove. Julian, Dr. Chen, numbers she didn't recognize. She powered it off and removed the battery, a trick she'd learned from sources who needed to disappear. By nightfall, Ilara checked into a motel under a false name, paying in cash and avoiding the security cameras. She used the motel's Wi-Fi to research involuntary psychiatric commitments in California. What she learned terrified her. With the right connections and paperwork, Julian could have her held for up to 72 hours for evaluation. If Dr. Chen declared her mentally ill, the hold could be extended indefinitely. Once she was in the system, fighting her way out would be nearly impossible, especially while pregnant. Ilara spent the night documenting everything she knew. She wrote down dates, times, conversations, financial records. If anything happened to her, maybe someone would eventually piece together the truth. At dawn, her worst fears materialized. Through the window of the motel room, she saw police cars pulling into the parking lot. Someone had tracked her down. Ilara grabbed her notes and the cash, slid out the bathroom window, and vanished into the Sacramento morning. The hunt had begun. Chapter 4. The involuntary commitment to Ilara's freedom lasted exactly 18 hours. She was caught at a gas station in Redding, apparently identified by facial recognition software on the security cameras. The police officers who arrested her were professional but firm, treating her as a mentally ill person, needing medical attention rather than a fugitive. Mrs. Holt, your husband is very worried about you, Officer Jones said, as she sat in the back of the patrol car. You've been missing for 2 days. He says you've been having episodes. I am not having episodes, Ilara said, forcing herself to remain calm. I am investigating my husband's plan to steal my inheritance. He has been having an affair with his business partner, and they plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. Officer Jones exchanged a look with her partner in the rearview mirror, the look that said, yes, definitely crazy. The Willow Creek Psychiatric Hospital was a private facility that looked more like a luxury resort than a mental health institution. Manicured lawns, fountains, buildings designed to soothe rather than intimidate. The kind of place wealthy families discreetly house their embarrassing relatives. Dr. Chen was waiting for her in the admissions office, along with Julian, who rushed forward with perfectly performed concern. Ilara, thank God you're safe, he said, reaching for her hands. I was so scared something had happened to you and the baby. Ilara sharply pulled away from his touch. Don't touch me. I know what you're doing. I heard you and Sylvia planning this. Dr. Chen made a note on her clipboard. Ilara, Sylvia is very worried about you too. She says you accused her of having an affair with Julian, which is clearly a paranoid delusion. It's not a delusion. I saw them together. I read their emails. What emails? Julian asked softly. Ilara, I've shown Dr. Chen our email accounts. There's nothing there, of course. Julian would have wiped everything clean after discovering Ilara had been to the apartment. Or perhaps He had moved their correspondence to accounts Alara couldn't access. Either way, she had no proof. The psychiatric evaluation lasted 3 hours. Dr. Chen asked questions designed to make her sound paranoid and delusional. When Alara tried to explain the financial evidence, it was dismissed as pregnancy-related anxiety over money. When she described the apartment, it was suggested she had misinterpreted what she had seen. Pregnant women often experience heightened emotions and paranoid thoughts, Dr. Chen explained to Julian, talking about Alara as if she wasn't in the room. Combined with the stress of your business expansion, it's triggered a temporary psychotic episode. Is the baby safe? Julian asked, his voice filled with fake worry. The pregnancy appears normal, but Alara needs immediate treatment. I recommend a 72-hour hold for evaluation, potentially extending to inpatient treatment until after the delivery. Alara's world collapsed. She was trapped in a system designed to help people, being weaponized against her. Every protest she made would be seen as proof of her mental illness. Every piece of evidence she provided would be dismissed as delusion. I want to call a lawyer, she said. Of course, Director Chen replied. But first, let's get you settled into your room. You need rest. The room was a cell with padded walls and furniture bolted to the floor. Alara sat on the narrow bed, one hand on her belly, thinking furiously. Julian had planned this perfectly. He had isolated her from her friends during their marriage, encouraging her to focus on their life together instead of maintaining outside relationships. Her family lived across the country and barely knew Julian. Who would believe her story? But Alara hadn't spent years as an investigative journalist without learning to think strategically. If Julian wanted to play this game, she would play it better. That evening, she met Dr. Elena Reyes, a staff psychiatrist working the night shift. Dr. Reyes was different from Dr. Chen, asking questions that suggested she might actually be listening. Tell me about your journalism career, Dr. Reyes said during their session. Alara was cautious at first, but something in the doctor's demeanor encouraged her to open up. She talked about her investigations, her methods, her instincts for spotting deception. These skills don't disappear during pregnancy, Dr. Reyes observed. If anything, protective instincts would intensify. For the first time in days, Alara felt like someone might believe her. Dr. Reyes, I know how this sounds, but I'm not paranoid. I'm a trained investigator who uncovered a conspiracy against me. My husband is trying to steal my inheritance and take my child. Dr. Reyes leaned forward. Alara, what would you say if I told you that you are not the first woman to be brought here under similar circumstances? Hope flared in Alara's chest. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the system meant to protect vulnerable people becomes corrupted. And sometimes people like me have to find creative ways to truly protect them. Alara realized she had found an unlikely ally. But before Dr. Reyes could explain more, the lights went out. Emergency lights flickered on, and alarms began to blare throughout the facility. What is happening? Alara asked. Dr. Reyes was already moving toward the door. Your husband just made a very big mistake. Chapter Phi. The Vanishing Act. The fire alarm was not a malfunction. It was Dr. Reyes's signal to an underground network of professionals who helped women escape abusive situations when the legal system failed them. Alara discovered this as she was led through a maintenance tunnel beneath Willow Creek Psychiatric Hospital. Still in her hospital gown, but carrying a bag of clothes Dr. Reyes had packed. We have about 20 minutes before they figure out you're gone, Dr. Reyes said, as they emerged into a parking garage 3 blocks away. Julian will claim you had a psychotic break and escaped. Every police officer in San Francisco will be looking for a dangerous, mentally ill pregnant woman. A van was waiting for them, driven by a woman Alara recognized as one of the hospital's night nurses. Inside were 3 other women, all with stories similar to Alara's. Wealthy husbands, who had used the system against them, children taken, fortunes stolen. The network has safe houses all over the country, Dr. Reyes explained as they drove into the pre-dawn darkness. We'll get you somewhere Julian can't find you. We'll help you deliver safely, and then we'll figure out how to get your life back. Ilara should have felt relief, but all she felt was fear. Julian will use this escape as proof I'm mentally ill. He'll say I'm a danger to my baby. Probably. Dr. Reyes nodded. But at least you'll be free to fight back. The safe house was a rustic ranch in Sonoma County, surrounded by vineyards and rolling hills. The woman running it, Sarah Hayes, was a former family court judge who had lost her seat after refusing to go along with corrupt practices. Julian Holt, Sarah said when she heard Ilara's story. We've been watching him for months. You aren't his first victim. Ilara felt sick. There have been others? 3 we know of. Wealthy women who ended up in psychiatric centers or dead under suspicious circumstances. Julian always emerged with control of their assets. Ilara sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Julian's crimes. How is he getting away with it? Money, connections, and a system designed to believe men before women, Sarah said flatly. But you have something the others didn't. You're a trained investigative journalist. You know how to build a case. For the next 2 weeks, Ilara worked tirelessly, despite her advanced pregnancy. She used encrypted computers to research Julian's background, his businesses, his connections to Dr. Chen and Judge Harrison. What she uncovered was a web of corruption reaching into the highest levels of the legal and medical establishments. Julian had been running variations of this scheme for years. He would identify wealthy women with inheritances or trust funds. He'd romance them into marriage. Then he'd systematically isolate them before triggering a mental health crisis that allowed him to seize control of their assets. Ilara also discovered that Julian's company was in deep financial trouble. The IPO he'd announced was based on fraudulent projections. He needed Ilara's $50 million trust fund to cover massive debts and avoid criminal charges for securities fraud. But while Ilara was compiling evidence, Julian was building his own case against her. The escape from Willow Creek had fit perfectly into his narrative. Local news stations ran stories about the mentally ill pregnant woman who had fled psychiatric treatment. Julian gave interviews expressing his concern for his wife and unborn child. Ilara is very sick, he told reporters, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. I just want her to get the help she needs before she hurts herself, or our baby. Public sympathy was overwhelming. Julian became the grieving husband whose pregnant wife had disappeared into the night. Social media campaigns urged people to report any sightings of the dangerous Ilara Holt. Ilara watched these news reports from the safe house, feeling her options dwindle. Even if she could prove Julian's crimes, who would believe a woman who had escaped a psychiatric hospital? We need to get you out of the country, Dr. Reyes said during one of her visits. Julian has hired private investigators. It's only a matter of time before they track you here. That night, Ilara went into labor. The birth was complicated, occurring during a fierce winter storm that knocked out power to the ranch. With no way to safely get to a hospital, Dr. Reyes and Sarah Hayes delivered Ilara's son by candlelight, using medical supplies they'd stockpiled for emergencies. When Ilara held her baby boy for the first time, she named him Justice. It was a promise, she decided. Justice for herself, for Julian's other victims, and for the son who deserved better than a father who saw him as nothing more than a path to stolen money. But even as Ilara cradled her newborn son, she knew their safety was temporary. Julian would never stop looking for them, and the next phase of his plan was already in motion. 3 days after Justice's birth, Sarah Hayes burst into Ilara's room with devastating news. Julian has filed papers to have you declared dead, she said. He's claiming your mental illness led to suicide, and he's petitioning for custody of the baby as the sole surviving parent. Ilara felt the ground shift beneath her. Julian wasn't just trying to control her, he was trying to erase her entirely. "How long do we have?" Ilara asked. "The hearing is scheduled for next week. If Julian can convince a judge you're dead, he gets everything. Your trust fund, legal guardianship of justice, and complete freedom to disappear with both." Ilara looked at her sleeping son and made a decision that would change everything. Then it's time for Ilara Holt to truly disappear. Chapter 6. Resurrection. Ilara's plan was audacious and dangerous. If she was going to be declared dead anyway, she would make Julian believe it was true while she built a case to destroy him from the shadows. Working with Dr. Reyes and the underground network, Ilara staged her own death with the precision of a military operation. They chose a remote stretch of Highway 1, where the cliffs dropped straight down to the Pacific Ocean. Ilara's abandoned car was positioned near a guardrail with recent damage, suggesting it had gone over during the storm. Personal effects were scattered at the scene. Ilara's wedding ring, found near the cliff edge. Her handbag, discovered on the rocks below. Just enough evidence to suggest suicide without providing a body that could contradict the story. Dr. Reyes used her medical connections to create a believable psychological profile supporting the suicide narrative. A pregnant woman suffering from postpartum psychosis, overwhelmed by guilt over her delusions about her loving husband. The news coverage was exactly what Julian needed. "Tragic end to search for missing pregnant wife," the headlines read. Ilara watched the reports from a safe house in Portland, Oregon, holding justice and feeling a strange sense of liberation. Ilara Holt was dead. Now she could become someone completely different. Julian's performance at the memorial service was Oscar-worthy. He wept convincingly as he spoke of losing the love of his life and their unborn child. Sylvia stood by his side, playing the supportive business partner rather than the grieving lover. "Ilara was the brightest light in my world," Julian told the crowd of mourners, most of whom barely knew Ilara. "Her illness took her from us, but I will honor her memory by building the future we dreamed of together." Within a week, Julian petitioned the court for control of Ilara's trust fund as her widower. Judge Harrison, still corrupt and still in Julian's pocket, fast-tracked the proceedings. Julian also announced he was taking a leave of absence from his company to mourn, conveniently avoiding the SEC investigation that was about to expose his fraudulent IPO. But Ilara wasn't just hiding, she was hunting. Using her new identity as Elena Reyes, a freelance journalist, Ilara began investigating Julian's network of accomplices. She discovered that Dr. Chen had falsified psychiatric evaluations for at least 12 women over the past 5 years. Judge Harrison had signed off on commitment orders and custody transfers without proper hearings. The corruption was systemic and well-funded. Ilara also discovered that she hadn't been Julian's only target. 2 other women had committed suicide after being treated by Dr. Chen and appearing before Judge Harrison. Their husbands had walked away with inherited wealth, totaling over $200 million. The breakthrough came when Ilara tracked down Laura Montero, one of Julian's previous victims, who had managed to escape before the final phase of his plan. Laura was living under a false name in Texas, too terrified to come forward, but willing to share her story with someone who had survived the same ordeal. "Julian's method is always the same," Laura explained during their encrypted video call. "Isolate, manipulate, then trigger a crisis that justifies commitment or worse. But he makes one mistake every time. He documents everything. Julian is so convinced he's untouchable that he keeps records of all his schemes. An insurance policy, just in case any of his partners try to double-cross him." Laura told Ilara about a storage unit in Los Angeles where Julian kept his insurance files. Physical documents that couldn't be deleted or hacked. Evidence of every crime, every bribe, every conspiracy. Ilara knew this was her chance, but breaking into that storage facility would require resources she didn't have. More importantly, it would require taking a risk that could expose Justice to danger. It was then that she received an unexpected message through the network's encrypted communication system. It was from Detective Mark Olson. "Elena, I know who you really are," the message read. "And I know I made a terrible mistake. Julian isn't who I thought he was. I want to help you get your life back." Ilara stared at the message for a long time. Mark had betrayed her once. Could she trust him again? Or was this another trap Julian had set for her? Dr. Reyes advised caution. Mark could be working for Julian. This could be a way to draw her out. But Ilara had the investigative journalist's gut for reading people, and something about Mark's message felt genuine. More importantly, she needed law enforcement on her side if she was to dismantle Julian's entire network. She agreed to meet Mark in a public place where she could quickly disappear if it was a trap. The meeting spot was a busy farmer's market in Santa Barbara, crowded enough to provide cover, but open enough to spot surveillance. Mark looked haggard when she saw him, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. "My God, Ilara. When I heard about the suicide, I knew something was wrong." Julian's reaction wasn't right. He was relieved, not devastated. Ilara studied her former colleague's face, looking for signs of deception. She saw guilt, regret, and determination, but no hint that he was lying. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "Because I've been investigating Julian since you disappeared, and what I've found would make your old journalism professor proud." Mark had discovered financial connections between Julian and Dr. Chen dating back 7 years. Shell companies funding the psychiatrist's research, payments disguised as consulting fees, a paper trail that proved their conspiracy was long-running and well-organized. "I can't arrest Julian without more evidence," Mark explained. "But if you can get into that storage unit Laura told you about, we'll have everything we need." Ilara felt hope and terror in equal measure. This could be her chance to destroy Julian and reclaim her life. Or it could be the mistake that got her and Justice killed. "What about my son?" she asked. "Leave him with the network for now. If this goes wrong, he'll be safer away from you." Ilara knew Mark was right, but the thought of separating from Justice made her physically ill. She had already lost so much to Julian's schemes. Could she risk losing her child too? That night, she held Justice close and made the hardest decision of her life. She would go after Julian, and she would either destroy him completely or die trying. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Breaking into Julian's storage unit required military precision and a willingness to commit multiple felonies. Ilara had spent weeks studying the facility's security, guard rotations, and camera blind spots. She had practiced lockpicking until her fingers bled and studied the building's electrical systems like a master thief. The plan was set for a Tuesday night, when the facility staff would be minimal. Mark would create a distraction by investigating a suspicious vehicle in the parking lot, pulling the security guard away from the monitoring station. Ilara would have exactly 12 minutes to get in, photograph Julian's documents, and get out. But as Ilara crouched in the shadows outside Secure Storage Solutions, watching Mark approach the guard booth, her phone vibrated with a message that changed everything. "We have your son," the text read. "Storage Unit 247. Come alone, or the baby dies." Ilara's blood ran cold. The message came from Julian's number. He had found Justice at the safe house. The network that had protected her for months had been compromised. For a moment, Ilara considered running. Julian wanted her dead anyway. If she disappeared completely, maybe he would leave Justice alone. He would raise him as his own. But Ilara knew Julian too well. Her son was just another asset to exploit. Julian would never love justice as a father should. Ilara texted Mark, "Abort, it's a trap." Then she walked into the storage facility through the front door. The guard barely looked up from his magazine as Ilara signed in with fake credentials. Julian had taught her that the best way to be invisible was to act like you belonged. She walked calmly to Unit 247, her heart pounding with every step. The unit door was slightly ajar. Ilara could hear Justice crying inside. "Hello, Ilara." Julian stepped out of the shadows, holding Justice in his arms. "Or should I say, Elena? Very creative, by the way. I almost didn't recognize you with the short hair." Ilara forced herself to remain calm. Julian fed on fear and desperation. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Let me hold my son," she said quietly. "Our son," Julian corrected. "And I don't think that's a good idea. You're supposed to be dead, remember? A dead woman can't exactly sue for custody." Ilara could see Sylvia in the background, along with two men she didn't recognize. Julian had brought muscle, which meant he was taking her seriously as a threat. "What do you want?" Ilara asked. "I want you to disappear for real this time. No more underground networks. No more fake identities. No more investigations. You are going to walk out of here tonight and never contact our son again." "And if I refuse?" Julian's smile was chilling. "Then Justice grows up in foster care while you rot in prison for faking your own death and insurance fraud. Your choice." Ilara realized Julian had orchestrated this perfectly. He had used Justice as bait to draw her out, but he had also created a scenario where she couldn't win. If she tried to expose him now, she would be arrested for the crimes she'd committed while trying to survive his conspiracy. But Julian had made one crucial mistake. He had brought Ilara to his storage unit, the place where he kept the evidence of all his crimes. Ilara had spent years learning to think several moves ahead during her investigations. As Julian talked, she was studying the contents of the unit. Boxes of files, computer equipment, and a safe that was currently standing open. Likely because Julian had been accessing documents to frame her for additional crimes. "I need proof that Justice will be safe," Ilara said, stalling for time. "You'll have to trust me on that one." Ilara almost laughed. Trust Julian, the man who had built his entire marriage on lies? "Let me say goodbye to him at least," she said. Julian hesitated. Then he stepped closer. The moment Ilara took Justice into her arms, she saw her chance. The open safe was 3 feet away. Julian's phone was on the counter next to it, likely holding the evidence he had used to track the safe house. Ilara kissed Justice's forehead and whispered, "Mommy loves you, baby. I'm going to fix this." Then she handed Justice back to Julian and moved as if to leave. Instead, she grabbed Julian's phone and dove behind the boxes of files. "Stop her!" Julian screamed. The two men Julian had brought with him lunged for Ilara, but she was already accessing the phone's camera roll and photographing everything in the open safe. Financial records, emails, pictures, legal documents. Years of evidence documenting Julian's conspiracy. Julian grabbed her arm, but Ilara had already uploaded the photos to a cloud storage account linked to Mark Olson's email. Even if Julian destroyed his phone, the evidence would survive. "You stupid witch," Julian growled. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I just destroyed you," Ilara answered calmly. It was then they heard the sirens. Mark had received the evidence Ilara uploaded and had called for backup. Police cars surrounded the storage facility, and officers were already moving through the building. Julian's face went white. "You set me up." "I learned from the best," Ilara said. But Julian wasn't finished. In a final desperate move, he grabbed Justice and backed toward the unit's back wall. Nobody moves or the baby gets hurt. Ilara felt the world crumble around her. Julian was trapped, cornered, and desperate. Men like him did unpredictable things when they had nothing to lose. "Julian, please," she said. "He's your son too. He's a means to an end." Julian spat. "He always was." The police were at the unit entrance now, but they couldn't risk Justice's safety by storming the place. Julian held all the cards again. It was then that Sylvia Navarro made the choice that changed everything. "Julian, stop," she said quietly. "It's over." "Shut up, Sylvia. We can still get out of this." "No, we can't. And I'm not going to jail for you." Sylvia stepped between Julian and the exit. "Give Alara her baby." Julian stared at his former partner in shock. "You're betraying me after everything we planned together?" "I signed up to steal money, not hurt children." The momentary distraction was all Alara needed. She lunged forward and snatched Justice from Julian's arms. As she put her son safely down, Sylvia tripped Julian, and the police swarmed in. Julian Holt was finally arrested. But as Alara embraced Justice, listening to Julian scream about conspiracy and injustice, she realized the hardest part was yet to come. Julian was caught, but his network of corruption was still intact, and Alara was still legally dead. Getting her life back would require one final play. Chapter 8. The Price of Truth. Alara Vance's legal resurrection required a combination of legal maneuvering, media strategy, and an audacity that would have impressed her journalism professors. Working with a team of lawyers provided by the underground network, Alara prepared to emerge from the dead in the most public way possible. The plan was to use Julian's own methods against him. He had used media manipulation and public sympathy to control the narrative around Alara's disappearance. Now she would use those same tools to expose his crimes and reclaim her identity. The timing had to be perfect. Julian was in custody, but his lawyers were already working on damage control. Dr. Chen had fled the country. Judge Harrison was claiming ignorance of any conspiracy. If Alara waited too long, Julian's network would regroup and paint her as a criminal who had faked her own death. Mark Olson had become Alara's strongest ally within law enforcement. The evidence from Julian's storage unit was overwhelming, but proving the extent of the conspiracy would take months. In the meantime, Alara needed to establish her legal status and protect Justice from Julian's remaining allies. "We're holding a press conference," Alara's lead attorney, Kathy Vega, explained. "You are going to tell your story publicly in one shot before Julian's people can spin it." The press conference was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at the San Francisco Press Club. Alara had chosen the location deliberately. It was where she had published her biggest investigative stories as a journalist. Now, she would become the story. The night before the press conference, Alara sat in a hotel room with Justice, preparing for the most important performance of her life. She had practiced her statement dozens of times, but her hand still shook as she held the pages. Justice crawled on the hotel bed, babbling happily and trying to reach for her notes. At 8 months old, he had no idea his father was a criminal, or that his mother had been legally dead for 4 months. To him, this was just another day in a life that had been chaotic since birth. "Tomorrow, little man, we're getting our life back," Alara whispered to him. The press room was packed. Alara recognized reporters from every major news outlet, plus national correspondents who had flown in to cover the story. The dead wife of tech mogul Julian Holt was about to come back to life, and everyone wanted the scoop. Alara walked to the podium, carrying Justice, who stared at the cameras with curious eyes. She was dressed professionally, but not expensively, projecting competence without suggesting she'd been living luxuriously while supposedly dead. "My name is Alara Holt," she began. 4 months ago, you were told I committed suicide by driving off a cliff near the California coast. That was a lie. I am very much alive, and I am here to tell you the truth about what really happened." For the next 30 minutes, Alara laid out Julian's conspiracy with the precision of the investigative journalist she once was. She presented financial evidence, medical records, recordings, and testimony from other victims. She explained the underground network that had saved her life and the legal challenges she had faced as a woman with no official identity. The room was utterly silent, save for the clicking of cameras and the scratching of pens on notepads. When Alara finished her statement, the questions came like a flood. "Mrs. Holt, why didn't you contact authorities instead of faking your death?" "Because the authorities were compromised. Dr. Chen, who evaluated me, was receiving payments from my husband. Judge Harrison, who would have heard my case, was part of the conspiracy. I had no choice but to disappear to protect myself and my son." "How do you respond to charges that you committed fraud by faking your death?" "I did not commit fraud. I did not take insurance money. I did not file false claims, and I did not steal anything from anyone. I simply disappeared to survive a conspiracy to steal my inheritance and take my child." "What proof do you have of your husband's crimes?" Alara gestured to the boxes of documents her legal team had laid out on tables around the room. "It's all here. Financial records, emails, recordings, witness testimony. My husband documented his own crimes because he never believed he would be caught." The most important question came from Sofia Ruiz, a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, who had covered several of Alara's investigations years earlier. "Alara, what do you want people to understand about what happened to you?" Alara looked directly into the cameras, knowing Julian would be watching from his jail cell. "I want people to understand that the systems meant to protect vulnerable people can be corrupted, that wealthy men with the right connections can make innocent women disappear, and that sometimes the only way to get justice is to be willing to sacrifice everything, including your own identity, to expose the truth." The press conference was broadcast live on social media and news networks across the country. Within hours, #JusticeForAlara was trending on Twitter. Julian's mugshot was being shared next to photos of his luxurious lifestyle, creating a stark contrast that played perfectly into Alara's hand. But the real victory came that evening, when Alara received a call from the district attorney, Sarah Wells. "Mrs. Holt, I've reviewed the evidence you've provided. We are prepared to offer you full immunity in exchange for your cooperation in prosecuting not just your husband, but his entire network." Alara closed her eyes and felt years of tension leave her body. "And my son? Full custody, retroactive to his birth. Julian Holt will never have legal rights to that child." That night, Alara held justice in her hotel room and called Dr. Reyes. "It's over," she said. "We won." "No," Dr. Reyes replied. "You won, and you saved so many other women in the process." Alara looked at her son, who was gumming a toy and smiling up at her with Julian's eyes, but her own stubborn determination. "What do you think, Justice? Ready to start our real life?" But even as Alara celebrated, she knew Julian would have one last card to play. Men like him didn't give up without a fight. Chapter 9. The Final Verdict. Julian Holt's trial became the media sensation of the year, nicknamed the Vanishing Wife case by journalists who couldn't resist the dramatic narrative. Alara testified for 3 days, walking the jury through Julian's conspiracy with the methodical precision that had made her a respected investigative reporter. Julian's defense team tried every angle they could find. They painted Alara as a mentally unstable woman who had a psychotic break during pregnancy. They claimed Julian was the true victim, a loving husband whose wife had disappeared and traumatized him. They suggested Alara had orchestrated the entire situation for attention and money. Nothing worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the documentation too thorough. Julian's own emails and recordings destroyed every lie his lawyers tried to build. But Julian saved his most devastating move for the very end. On the final day of testimony, Julian's attorney called an unexpected witness, Dr. Monica Stein, a pediatric psychiatrist who had examined Justice while Julian had custody. "Dr. Stein," the defense attorney said, In your professional opinion, is Justice Holt safe with his mother? Ilara's blood ran cold. She hadn't been allowed to see Dr. Stein's report, and the psychiatrist's expression suggested bad news. Based on my evaluation, Dr. Stein said, I have serious concerns about Ilara Holt's fitness as a mother. Her decision to fake her own death and expose her child to an unstable lifestyle shows poor judgment and possible mental illness. Ilara watched the jury's faces change. Although Julian was clearly guilty of fraud and conspiracy, his attorney was sowing doubt about Ilara's character. If she couldn't provide a stable home for Justice, perhaps Julian's crimes were secondary to the child's well-being. Kathy Vega, Ilara's attorney, countered during cross-examination. Dr. Stein, are you aware that Ilara Holt was fleeing a conspiracy to kidnap her son and steal her inheritance? I understand that is her claim, yeah. And are you aware that this conspiracy has been proven through financial records, recordings, and the testimony of multiple witnesses? I'm aware of the allegations. Then, in your professional opinion, is a mother who takes extraordinary steps to protect her child from kidnapping mentally incapacitated? Dr. Stein hesitated. The methods she chose were extreme and potentially harmful to the child. More harmful than leaving the child with a father who plotted to steal his inheritance and possibly kill his mother? That is not for me to determine. Ilara could see the jury was confused. Julian's crimes were obvious, but his lawyer had successfully muddied the waters around Ilara's fitness as a mother. When the court recessed for the day, Kathy pulled Ilara aside. They're going to recommend Justice be put into foster care pending a separate custody hearing, she said. Julian's lawyer argues that both parents are unfit. Ilara felt her world crumble again. She had fought so hard to protect Justice, only for the legal system to take him away anyway. That night, Ilara sat in her hotel room, staring at legal documents and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she should have stayed dead. Maybe Justice would have been better off with Julian. Even if Julian was a criminal, at least he would have grown up rich and secure. Doubt was overwhelming. Ilara had sacrificed everything to get to this moment, and she was about to lose anyway. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Reyes. Ilara, I'm watching the trial coverage. It looks like you're giving up. Maybe I should. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe I am mentally unstable. What kind of mother fakes her own death? The kind that's willing to die to save her child. Ilara, listen to me. You are not crazy. You are not unfit. You are a warrior who fought an entire corrupt system, and you won. It doesn't feel like a win, because it's not over yet. Julian has one more move, and so do you. Dr. Reyes was right. Ilara had spent so much time reacting to Julian's schemes that she had forgotten her greatest strength. She wasn't just a victim, or a mother, or a woman fighting for justice. She was an investigative journalist, and she had one more story to tell. Ilara spent the night researching Dr. Monica Stein. By morning, she had discovered that Dr. Stein had financial connections to the same shell companies that had funded Dr. Chen's research. Julian's corruption network was even bigger than anyone had imagined. When court reconvened, Ilara passed a note to Kathy. Her lawyer read it and requested permission to recall Dr. Stein for additional questioning. Dr. Stein, Kathy said, are you familiar with Rio Medical Research? Dr. Stein's confident expression wavered. Yes, it's a research foundation. A foundation that has paid you over $200,000 in consulting fees over the past 3 years? I don't see how that is. It's relevant because Rio Medical Research is a shell company owned by Julian Holt. You have been receiving money from the defendant while evaluating his wife's fitness as a mother. The room erupted. Julian's lawyer protested furiously, but the damage was done. Ilara had exposed Julian's network one final time, proving his corruption extended even to the custody evaluation. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Julian Holt was found guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, kidnapping, and racketeering. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Chen, Dr. Stein, and Judge Harrison were all arrested based on the evidence uncovered during the trial. The entire network that had enabled Julian's crimes was dismantled, and Alara was granted full custody of justice, with the court formally apologizing for the trauma she had endured while seeking protection from a corrupt system. As Alara walked out of the courthouse with justice in her arms, reporters shouted questions about her plans for the future. Alara stopped on the courthouse steps and looked back at the building where she had finally found justice. "I'm going home," she said simply. But as she spoke those words, Alara realized she no longer knew where home was. The penthouse belonged to her past life. The safe house was temporary. The underground network had served its purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, Alara was truly free to choose her own path. Conclusion and call to action. Ending. 2 years after Julian's conviction, Alara stood on the deck of her cottage, overlooking the Oregon coast, watching justice take his first wobbly steps onto the weathered wooden planks. At 2 years old, he was fearless, stubborn, and utterly determined to explore every inch of his world. Alara had chosen Cannon Beach for their new home, drawn by the infinite horizon and the sound of the waves washing away the noise of her past. She had bought the cottage with money from the civil judgment against Julian, who had been forced to pay restitution for the inheritance he'd tried to steal. Alara Holt, the trophy wife, was gone forever. In her place was Alara Vance, the investigative journalist who had become one of the most sought-after experts on domestic abuse and financial fraud. Her book, Vanishing Point, How I Disappeared to Save My Life, had spent 18 weeks on the national bestseller list. The documentary based on her story had won a major award. More importantly, the Alara Vance Foundation had helped over 300 women escape situations similar to hers. Dr. Elena Reyes ran the foundation's network of safe houses, which had expanded to 12 states. Detective Mark Olson headed the law enforcement training program, teaching police to recognize sophisticated domestic abuse schemes. Even Sylvia Navarro, who had served 18 months for her role in Julian's conspiracy, now worked as a counselor, helping other women recognize the warning signs of manipulation. Alara's phone rang as she watched Justice chase seagulls on the sand. The caller ID showed Kathy Vega, her former lawyer who had become a close friend. "Alara, you have to see the news. Julian is appealing his conviction." Alara felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it passed quickly. "On what grounds?" "His new lawyer claims your testimony was fraudulent because you were using a fake identity when you investigated him." Alara laughed, surprising herself. 2 years ago, the news of Julian's legal maneuvering would have sent her into a panic. Now, it just seemed pathetic. "Kathy, we documented and everything. The Court of Appeals is not going to overturn a conviction based on Julian's lawyer grasping at straws." "I know. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case reporters start calling." "Let them call. I'm not hiding anymore." After hanging up, Alara realized how far she had come. Julian had been the center of her universe, first as a husband she had loved, then as an enemy she had feared. Now he was just a criminal in prison, growing older and more irrelevant with each passing day. Justice toddled back to the deck, covered in sand and grinning, holding a shell he'd discovered. "Mommy, look," he said, his vocabulary expanding daily. Alara knelt to examine his treasure. "That is beautiful, baby. Shall we add it to our collection?" Their small cottage was filled with the shells, stones, and bits of driftwood Justice collected during their daily walks on the beach. Alara had initially tried to limit the clutter, but she had grown to love these reminders of their simple, honest life. That night, after Justice was asleep, Ilara sat at her computer, working on her second book. This one focused on the systemic changes needed to prevent predators like Julian from exploiting vulnerable women. She had interviewed dozens of experts, survivors, and law enforcement officials. An email notification popped up on her screen. The subject line made her smile. Speaking opportunity, Harvard Law School. Harvard wanted Ilara to deliver the keynote address at their symposium on domestic violence and financial abuse. The invitation was signed by Dean Patricia Garcia, who had apparently rebuilt her career after serving her time for judicial corruption. Ilara stared at the email for a long time. Patricia Garcia was one of the people who had enabled Julian's crimes. She had signed the commitment orders that had trapped Ilara in the psychiatric hospital. Now she wanted Ilara to speak at Harvard. Ilara's first instinct was to delete the email. But then she thought of the students who would attend the symposium. Young lawyers who might one day represent women like her. Prosecutors who might face cases of financial abuse. Judges who would rule on custody cases. Ilara started typing her reply. Dean Garcia, I accept your invitation. I have one condition, however. I want to address not only the legal aspects of domestic abuse, but also the institutional failures that enable it. I want to talk about judges who sign orders without proper hearings, doctors who falsify evaluations for money, and police officers who dismiss women's concerns as hysteria. If you are willing to let me tell that story, I will be there. The answer came back within the hour. Ms. Vance, that is exactly the conversation we need to have. Ilara closed her laptop and walked out onto the deck. The Oregon coast was magnificent at night, with the stars reflecting on the dark water and the rhythmic sound of the waves creating a natural symphony. She thought of Julian, probably lying in a narrow prison bunk, surrounded by concrete walls instead of ocean views. She thought of the life they had planned together, built on lies and manipulation. And she thought of the life she had built for herself and Justice, founded on hard-won truth and freedom. Ilara had learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to be willing to lose everything. She had given up her identity, her security, her legal existence, and nearly her son to escape Julian's trap. But in losing everything, she had found something more valuable than the wealth Julian had tried to steal. She had found herself. Justice stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he was having happy dreams. Ilara checked on him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Sweet dreams, baby," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we'll find more shells." As Ilara settled into her own bed, listening to the timeless conversation between the wind and the waves, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The future stretched before them, like the endless horizon visible from her cottage windows. Julian had tried to erase her, but Ilara had become more herself than ever. She was no longer the woman who had been afraid to question her husband's lies or trust her own instincts. She was the woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing, who had turned her trauma into purpose, who had shown her son that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. In the morning, they would walk the beach again. Justice would find new treasures, and Ilara would keep writing the story of their triumph. But tonight, for the first time in years, Ilara fell asleep without checking the locks on her doors or worrying about who might be chasing her. She was finally, completely home. Epilogue and final thought. Years later, Ilara received a letter forwarded through her publisher. The return address was a federal prison in Arizona. Julian had written to her from his cell. Ilara almost threw the letter away unread, but curiosity won out. Julian's handwriting was still precise, still confident despite his circumstances. Ilara began the letter. I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. Prison has given me time to think about the man I became and the pain I caused. I know you will never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that Justice is lucky to have you as a mother. You saved him from becoming someone like me. Ilara read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She felt no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Julian had become what he had always been, irrelevant to her real life. That afternoon, she and 7-year-old Justice walked on their familiar beach, collecting shells and talking about his school day. Justice was everything Julian was not: honest, kind, curious about the world around him. He knew his father was in prison, but Ilara had never told him the details. That would be Justice's choice when he was old enough to understand. "Mommy," Justice said, as they reached their favorite tide pool, "tell me again about the time you disappeared." Ilara smiled. Justice loved her stories, especially the one about the brave woman who vanished to save her baby and came back stronger than ever. "Once upon a time," Ilara began, "there was a woman who thought she was trapped, but she learned that sometimes, when you disappear completely, you can become exactly who you were meant to be." Justice nodded solemnly, as if he understood the deeper meaning. Perhaps he did. Perhaps growing up with a mother who had fought for her freedom had taught him lessons about courage most children never learned. As they walked home along the beach, Ilara realized that Julian's letter had been a final gift, not because of what he had written, but because of what she had felt reading it. Nothing. Julian Holt no longer had the power to hurt her, to scare her, or even to anger her. He was just a man in a cage, while she was free beneath an endless sky. Ilara had won more completely than she had ever dared to dream. Thank you for joining us for this incredible true story. Remember the lesson of Ilara Vance. You are stronger than you believe, braver than you imagine, and capable of so much more than you ever dreamed. What part of Ilara's plan did you find the most brilliant? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, and if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of triumph and justice. We'll see you in the next one.